Imagine selling the only home your mother left you to save a billionaire whose wife had just left him for his richest best friend. When Adrian Vale's company collapsed overnight, people didn't just abandon him, they enjoyed watching him break. His investors vanished, his partners disappeared, his friends stopped answering his calls. But the cruelest betrayal came from the woman he trusted most. While Adrian was still fighting to save what was left of his company, his wife signed the divorce papers, took what she could, and walked straight into the arms of Marcus, his richest best friend. The same Marcus who had stood beside Adrian for years. The same Marcus who knew every weakness in his empire. The same Marcus who smiled for the cameras like he had already won. Adrian lost his fortune, his marriage, and his reputation in less than a month. By the end, he had one person left. Clara, his quiet assistant. She wasn't rich, she wasn't powerful, she didn't come from money. She lived in a small house on the edge of town, the only thing her late parents had left her. And then she sold it. Not for herself, not for family, not for love, but to pay the debt that could have destroyed Adrian's last chance forever. Everyone called her foolish. Even Adrian was furious. "Why would you sacrifice your future for me?" he asked. Clara looked at him and said, "Because I know who you are when the world isn't watching." For months, people laughed at her. They said Adrian would forget her the moment he became powerful again. Then came the impossible news. A $3.8 billion contract. Adrian Vale was back. The city that mocked him suddenly bowed. His ex-wife wanted him back. Marcus begged for a meeting. But Adrian had already made his decision. At a live press conference, with cameras flashing and the whole world watching, he revealed the real reason he fought his way back. And then he did the one thing Clara never expected. The morning Adrian Vale lost everything, the sky over Manhattan was the color of wet concrete. Rain streaked down the glass walls of Vale International, turning the city into a blur of gray towers and flashing headlights. Usually, the top floor of the building buzzed with assistants carrying tablets, lawyers speaking into phones, executives moving fast enough to look important even when they had nothing to say. But that morning, the silence felt louder than any chaos. Clara Whitmore stood outside conference room A with a folder clutched against her chest, watching men who had once begged for 5 minutes with Adrian now avoid even saying his name. The company's stock had crashed before sunrise. By 8 o'clock, 3 major investors had pulled out. By 9, the banks froze emergency credit lines. By 10, every news channel in the city had Adrian Vale's face on screen beneath the same brutal headline. Billionaire CEO, Adrian Vale faces total collapse. Clara had worked for Adrian for 4 years. She knew his schedule better than he did. She knew he took his coffee black when he was focused, untouched when he was angry, and with 2 sugars only after speaking to his mother. She knew which clients made him impatient, which reporters he disliked, and which charity invitations he secretly accepted even when he pretended he was too busy. But she had never seen him like this. Adrian sat at the head of the conference table in a navy suit that probably cost more than Clara's monthly rent. His tie was loosened. His hair, normally perfect, was slightly disordered from the way he kept running his hand through it. Around him sat board members, attorneys, and executives who had built their careers around his success. Now they looked at him like he was already a corpse. "We need to discuss resignation," one board member said carefully. Adrian lifted his eyes. "Mine." No one answered. That was answer enough. Clara felt her stomach tighten. 2 weeks earlier, these same people had toasted him at a gala, calling him the future of global infrastructure. His company had contracts in 5 countries, politicians answering his calls, magazines calling him unstoppable. Now, because one foreign financing deal had collapsed, because one lender had panicked, Because one person had leaked confidential debt exposure to the press, everyone was acting like Adrian himself had set the building on fire. "Resignation won't save the company," Adrian said, his voice calm but cold. "It may save what is left of public confidence," another executive replied. "What you mean," Adrian said, "is that you need someone to blame." Again, silence. Clara looked toward the glass wall and saw employees gathering outside the office doors, whispering. Some looked scared, some looked curious. A few looked pleased. Success made people smile at you. Failure showed what those smiles had been hiding. The meeting ended without resolution. Or maybe it ended with the only resolution that mattered. Everyone had chosen themselves. By noon, the building was in open retreat. Executives rushed from offices carrying boxes and sealed envelopes. Lawyers arrived with printed statements. Phones rang unanswered. The public relations team drafted apologies for decisions they had praised only yesterday. Clara moved through it all quietly, doing the work no one noticed. She gathered documents, forwarded calls, arranged emergency meetings, and made sure Adrian had the files he needed before he asked for them. At 2:17 p.m., his wife arrived. Vanessa Vale stepped out of the private elevator wearing a cream coat, diamond earrings, and an expression so composed it seemed rehearsed. Clara had seen Vanessa many times before, at company events, charity dinners, holiday parties. She was beautiful in the effortless way money protected beauty. Every photograph of her looked planned by someone who understood lighting and power. But today, she did not look like a wife coming to support her husband. She looked like someone arriving to collect what belonged to her before the house burned down. "Where is he?" Vanessa asked. "In his office," Clara said. Vanessa walked past without thanking her. The office door closed. For 20 minutes, Clara heard nothing. Then Adrian's voice cut through the wood. "You already filed." Clara froze. Vanessa's reply was quieter but clear enough. "I had to protect myself." A long pause followed. "From me?" Adrian asked. "From your ruin." The word landed like a slap. Clara turned away, embarrassed to be hearing something so private, but there was nowhere to go. The outer office was hers. She stood beside her desk, staring at a calendar filled with meetings that no longer mattered. Then Vanessa said the sentence that changed the temperature of the room. "Marcus has offered me stability." Clara's fingers went cold. Marcus Ellery, Adrian's closest friend, the man who had stood beside him at his wedding, the man who had been in half the company's strategy meetings, the man who knew every weakness in Adrian's empire because Adrian had trusted him enough to speak honestly. The office door opened. Vanessa stepped out first, face smooth, chin high. Adrian stood behind her, one hand braced against the doorframe. For the first time since Clara had known him, he looked stunned. Not angry, not proud, simply stunned. Vanessa did not look back as she walked to the elevator. When the doors closed behind her, Adrian remained still. Clara wanted to say something, but every sentence sounded too small. "I'll cancel your 4 o'clock, she said softly. Adrian gave a humorless laugh. "Which one? The bank that won't lend, the partner who won't answer, or the board that wants my head?" Clara lowered her eyes. "I'm sorry," she said. He looked at her then, really looked at her, as if remembering she was still there. "Go home, Clara. I still have work to finish." "There is no work," Adrian said, "not anymore." But there was. There were unpaid staff to reassure, creditors to organize, contracts to review, accounts to protect, and a man standing in the middle of an empire that had collapsed so fast he had not yet realized where the sharpest pieces were. So Clara stayed. By evening, the news had spread everywhere. Clips of Vanessa leaving a restaurant with Marcus appeared online before sunset. Commentators discussed Adrian's downfall with bright smiles and dramatic voices. Former friends released careful statements about distance and concern. People who had begged for his attention yesterday now spoke about him as if they had always known he would fail. At 11:43 p.m., Clara finally found Adrian in the dark conference room, sitting alone. The city lights reflected against the windows behind him. On the table lay a stack of documents from the bank. Clara recognized the red stamp immediately. Final demand notice. Adrian did not try to hide it. There's a personal guarantee attached to one of the bridge loans. He said quietly, if I can't settle part of it within 30 days, they start seizing everything that's left. The company won't survive the next hearing. How much? Clara asked. He smiled faintly, but there was no humor in it. More than anyone loyal to me can afford. Clara looked at the paper, then at Adrian. The man everyone had feared, admired, envied, and betrayed sat beneath the dim lights, with nothing but debt, silence, and headlines waiting to bury him. But Clara did not see a ruined billionaire. She saw the man who had once paid an employee's hospital bills without allowing his name to be mentioned. She saw the man who had sent flowers every year to the widow of a driver who had died before Clara even joined the company. She saw the man who never explained his kindness because kindness did not fit the image the world had built for him. And for one dangerous moment, Clara thought of the small blue house on the edge of town. The house with white shutters. The house her parents had left her. The only thing she owned. Go home, Adrian repeated, softer this time. Clara picked up the folder from the table and held it against her chest. Yes, sir, she said. But as she walked out into the rain, she already knew she would not be sleeping that night. Because everyone else had decided Adrian Vale was finished. And Clara Whitmore was beginning to wonder what it would cost to prove them wrong. Clara Whitmore did not go home immediately. She rode the subway past her stop twice, sitting between strangers whose lives had not changed that day. A student slept with headphones in. A nurse leaned against the window, eyes closed. A man in a wrinkled suit scrolled through the news on his phone, and there, glowing on the small screen, was Adrian Vale's face again. Clara looked away, but she could not escape the headlines. Adrian Vale's Empire Cumbles. Vanessa Vale, FILES, for divorce. MARCUS, ELLERY seen with billionaire's wife amid bankruptcy scandal. Every word felt designed to make people stare. By the time Clara finally got off the train, the rain had stopped. The streets near her neighborhood were quiet, lined with old trees and modest houses that seemed untouched by the cruelty of the city's financial district. Her house sat at the end of Maple Lane. Small, blue, a little faded. The porch light flickered in the damp night air, and the white shutters needed repainting. In spring, roses climbed along the fence. In winter, the pipes complained. It was not grand, it was not impressive. No magazine would ever photograph it. But it was hers. Her mother had planted lavender beside the front steps. Her father had built the bookshelf in the living room with uneven hands and too much pride. Every room carried a memory: birthdays, soup during storms, quiet mornings, late-night talks at the kitchen table. Clara stood at the gate for a long time. Then she unlocked the door and stepped inside. The house smelled faintly of lemon polish and old wood. On the mantel stood a photograph of her parents from 25 years earlier, smiling in front of the same porch. Her father's arm was around her mother. Her mother's eyes were bright, full of a future she had not lived long enough to see. Clara took off her coat slowly. "You tell me not to do it," she whispered. The house gave no answer. By midnight, Clara sat at the kitchen table with the bank documents spread in front of her. She had copied the numbers from Adrian's file, not because she intended to betray him, but because she knew he would never ask for help. The debt was not the whole company's failure. No one person could fix that. But there was one urgent payment, one personal guarantee tied to a bridge loan, one amount that could keep the creditors from triggering a chain reaction before Adrian had time to fight. It was still enormous. Too enormous. Clara checked her savings account, then laughed once under her breath. Not enough. Not even close. She opened a folder from the cabinet and pulled out the valuation letter she had received 6 months ago, after a neighbor convinced her to see what the house was worth. Her eyes moved over the number. Enough. Barely, but enough. Clara leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes. Selling the house would mean losing the last piece of her parents. It would mean packing memories into boxes and handing the keys to someone who would never understand why the kitchen window mattered, or why the third stair creaked, or why the lavender by the steps had to be watered gently. It would mean starting over with nothing. And for what? For a man who had never called her anything but Miss Whitmore until last year. For a man who lived in a world of private elevators and tailored suits. For a man who might rebuild his fortune and never look back. Clara pressed both hands against her face. She was not foolish. She knew how people would see it. The quiet assistant sacrificing everything for the fallen billionaire. They would call it pathetic, desperate, naive. Maybe it was. But Clara also remembered the day her father died. She had been 22, terrified, buried under hospital bills and funeral arrangements, trying to pretend she was stronger than she was. She had asked for 3 days off work, expecting nothing more. Instead, Adrian had approved 2 weeks of paid leave. Then, quietly, anonymously, the largest medical bill vanished. Clara had only found out months later because the billing office made a mistake and sent her a receipt with the name of the payer listed. A Vale. When she tried to thank him, he had not even looked up from his desk. "You're useful when you're not exhausted," he had said. Cold words. Kind action. That was Adrian. He hid decency like a weakness. At 7 the next morning, Clara called a real estate broker. By noon, she had received a cash offer from a developer who had been trying to buy older houses in her neighborhood for months. By 3, she signed the first documents. By the following week, the sale was complete. The speed of it made her feel as if she had not sold a house, but stepped off a cliff. She moved into a small rented room above Mrs. Alvarez's bakery, taking only what fit in 6 boxes: clothes, documents, photographs, her mother's recipe book, and the small wooden clock her father had fixed every year, though it never kept perfect time. The morning the funds cleared, Clara went to the bank. She wore her plain grey coat and carried a folder with shaking hands. The loan officer did not understand at first. "You're making a payment on behalf of Mr. Adrian Vale?" he asked. "Yes." He looked at her again, as if expecting her to explain. She did not. "And your relationship to Mr. Vale?" "I'm his assistant." The man blinked. Clara held his gaze. "Process it, please." It took 40 minutes. 40 minutes to sign papers that cost her a lifetime. When it was done, the officer handed her the receipt. Clara folded it carefully and placed it in her bag. Outside, the city moved as if nothing had happened. Taxis splashed through puddles, people shouted into phones, a street vendor handed coffee to a woman in red heels. Clara stood on the sidewalk and waited for regret to arrive. It did. But so did something else. Relief. Adrian had time now. Not safety, not victory, just time. Sometimes time was the difference between a man drowning and a man finding the surface. That evening, Adrian found out. Clara had expected the bank to notify his lawyers, not him directly. She had hoped the payment would disappear into paperwork, one more transaction among thousands. But Adrian Vale noticed everything. At 8:12 p.m., her phone rang. His name lit up the screen. Clara stared at it until the third ring, then answered. "Miss Whitmore," he said. His voice was quiet. Too quiet. "Yes, Mr. Vale. Where are you?" "At home." A pause. "Don't lie to me." Clara closed her eyes. Through the thin wall of her rented room, she could hear Mrs. Alvarez closing the bakery downstairs. "I'm at my room." "Your room?" "Yes." Another silence. Then Adrian said, "The bank called." Clara did not speak. "They said someone made the emergency payment. Someone used proceeds from a property sale." His voice sharpened. "Tell me it wasn't you." She looked around the tiny room. At the suitcase by the bed. At the cardboard boxes stacked near the window. At the photograph of her parents on the nightstand. "I can't tell you that," she said. For several seconds, she heard only his breathing. Then he said, "Clara." It was the first time he had ever said her first name like that. Not as an instruction. Not as a formality. As if it hurt him. "What did you do?" Clara swallowed. "What everyone else refused to do." "No," his voice grew harder. "You had no right." "I had every right. It was my house. It was your future. And your company was yours." "Do not compare them," he snapped. "I'm not comparing them," Clara said, her own voice trembling now. "I'm saying I made a choice. For me. For the man who once helped me when no one was watching." Adrian went silent. Clara wiped quickly at her cheek, angry with herself for crying. "I know you'll hate this," she said. "I know you'll say it was reckless. Maybe it was, but you needed time, and I had something that could buy it." "You sold your parents' house," he said. The words sounded heavier coming from him. "Yes." "Why?" Clara looked at the photograph on the nightstand. "Because I know you are not what they say. Because I know betrayal does not make a man worthless. Because someone should stay." But what she said was softer. "Because I know who you are when the world isn't watching." On the other end of the line, Adrian made no sound. Then the call ended. Clara stared at the dark screen, heart pounding. She expected anger the next day. A cold dismissal. Maybe even a check thrown onto her desk, though she knew he did not have money to throw anymore. Instead, when she arrived at the half-empty office the following morning, Adrian was already there. He stood beside her desk, dressed in the same black coat he wore to court, his face unreadable. In his hand was the bank receipt. "You should have let me fall," he said. Clara set down her bag. "No." His jaw tightened. "I will repay you. I didn't do it for repayment. That makes it worse." "Maybe." He looked at her then, and something in his expression cracked, not fully, not enough for anyone else to notice, but Clara saw it. The world had humiliated him. His wife had abandoned him. His best friend had betrayed him. But Clara's sacrifice wounded him in a different way. Because it reminded him he was still worth saving. And that was the one thing Adrian Vale no longer knew how to believe. For the next few weeks, Clara learned how quickly kindness could become gossip. At first, no one knew. The emergency payment moved quietly through lawyers and bank officers, buried beneath piles of bankruptcy filings, restructuring notices, and court documents. To the outside world, Adrian Vale was still finished. Reporters still waited outside the company building. Commentators still smiled when discussing his fall. Former business partners still gave interviews about warning signs they had apparently noticed only after the collapse. Inside Vale International, the building felt like a ghost of itself. Entire departments had emptied. Nameplates were removed from office doors. Plants died near windows because no one remembered to water them. The grand reception desk, once surrounded by visitors and security escorts, now had one guard who spent most of his shift watching the elevators. Clara kept coming in every morning at 7:30. She answered calls, she organized documents, she scheduled meetings with creditors who often cancelled an hour before. She made coffee Adrian usually forgot to drink. She typed letters to people who no longer cared to respond. Adrian worked like a man trying to outrun a storm while already soaked to the bone. He met with attorneys before sunrise. He reviewed contracts after midnight. He cut expenses, sold assets, negotiated extensions, and searched for anyone still willing to believe Vale International had a future. He was colder than before. Not cruel, just distant. Clara understood why. Her sacrifice sat between them like a debt larger than money. He barely looked at her some days, but whenever she entered the room, his shoulders stiffened. Whenever she handed him a file, his fingers avoided hers. Whenever she asked if he needed anything, he answered with one word. No. Then the story leaked. Clara found out from the whispers. She stepped into the lobby one morning and heard two junior analysts speaking near the elevators. Is it true? One asked. She sold her house, the other whispered, for him. No way. That's what accounting says. She paid part of the debt. The first analyst laughed softly. That's insane. Does she think he's going to marry her or something? Clara stopped walking. The second analyst lowered her voice, but not enough. Maybe she's been in love with him for years. Heat climbed Clara's neck. She kept her face still and walked past them. By noon, everyone knew. By evening, the internet knew. Someone had posted a blurry photo of Clara leaving the office beside the headline. Assistant SELLS home to save disgraced billionaire boss. The comments were worse than the headline. People called her desperate, foolish, delusional. Some said Adrian must have manipulated her. Others said she was chasing money that no longer existed. A few made jokes about her small rented room above the bakery, as if losing a home was entertainment. Clara sat on the edge of her narrow bed that night, phone in hand, reading until the words blurred. Then she turned the phone off. Mrs. Alvarez knocked softly a few minutes later. Clara Mija, she called through the door. I made soup. Clara wiped her eyes quickly. I'm not hungry. The door opened anyway. Mrs. Alvarez was in her 60s, short and round, with silver hair tied at the back of her head and flower on one sleeve. She carried a bowl like an argument. You are sad, she said. Sad people need soup. Clara tried to smile. That's not a medical fact. It is in my bakery. Mrs. Alvarez set the bowl on the small table and looked around the room. Her eyes landed on the boxes Clara still had not unpacked. I saw the news, she said gently. Clara looked down. I suppose everyone did. People talk because they cannot understand quiet courage. It wasn't courage. What was it? Clara did not answer immediately. Through the window, she could see the streetlights shining on the wet pavement. Her old house was 20 minutes away, but it felt like another lifetime. I don't know anymore, she admitted. I thought I was doing the right thing. Now everyone thinks I'm pathetic. Mrs. Alvarez sat beside her. People called my husband foolish when he opened the bakery, she said. They said no one would buy bread from a man with no money and a wife who barely spoke English. 40 years later, their children buy birthday cakes from me. Clara smiled faintly. Let them talk, Mrs. Alvarez said. Talking is easy, sacrifice is not. The next morning, Clara returned to work. She wore a simple black dress, tied her hair neatly, and stepped into the office as if she had not spent half the night crying. The whispers followed her. In the break room, conversations stopped when she entered. In the hallway, people looked away too quickly. One manager, who had once forgotten Clara's name 3 times in one meeting, suddenly said, "That was quite a dramatic thing you did." Clara looked at him. "It was a payment," she said, "not a performance." He had nothing to say after that. Adrian heard the gossip too. Clara knew because his anger became visible. Not loud, not explosive, but sharp in small ways. He ended a meeting when one creditor made a joke about loyal employees. He dismissed a consultant who asked whether Clara's payment had been personal. He told the public relations team to remove her name from every statement, every article correction, every internal memo. But he still did not speak to her about it. Not until Friday night. The office was almost empty. Rain tapped against the windows again, softer this time. Clara was sorting legal correspondence when Adrian came out of his office holding his coat. "You shouldn't come in tomorrow," he said. Clara looked up. "There's a creditor call at 10. I'll handle it." "You need the updated loan schedule." "I said I'll handle it." Clara closed the folder slowly. "Are you firing me?" His expression changed. "No." "Then why are you trying to send me away?" Adrian looked toward the dark windows. "Because they are humiliating you for something I should never have allowed. You didn't allow it, I chose it. And now they are tearing you apart for my failure." Clara stood. "They were tearing you apart before I did anything." "That is different. Because you think you deserve it." His face hardened. Clara knew she had gone too far, but she did not step back. Adrian's voice dropped. "You should have kept your house. Maybe. You should have protected yourself. Maybe. You should have left like everyone else." "No." The word was quiet, but it filled the room. Adrian stared at her. Clara's hands trembled, so she folded them in front of her. "I'm not Vanessa," she said. "I'm not Marcus. I'm not your investors. I'm not here because the company is powerful or because your name opens doors. I stayed because I know what you did for people when there were no cameras. I stayed because I know the difference between a ruined man and a worthless one." For a moment, Adrian looked as if she had struck him. Then his phone rang. He glanced at the screen. His face changed. Not with relief. With disbelief. Clara noticed immediately, "What is it?" Adrian answered the call. He said almost nothing, only listened. The conversation lasted less than a minute. When he lowered the phone, the silence between them had transformed. "There's a delegation flying in from Singapore," he said slowly. "They want a private meeting." "About what?" Adrian looked at her, and for the first time in weeks, Clara saw something dangerous return to his eyes. "A spark. A possibility. The North Star infrastructure contract," he said, "the one everyone said was dead." Clara's breath caught. "That contract is worth billions." 3.8, Adrian said. Outside, the city kept moving, unaware that the man it had buried might have just heard the first shovel scrape against his coffin from the inside. Adrian picked up his coat. "Cancel nothing," he said. Clara reached for her notebook. "Yes, Mr. Vale." He paused at the door. Then quietly he added, "And Clara." She looked up. "Tomorrow morning, 7 o'clock. "Yes. You're coming with me." At 7 the next morning, Clara arrived at Vale International expecting to find Adrian already waiting. Instead, she found him in the lobby surrounded by men who had once treated him like royalty, and now looked terrified to be standing too close. 3 attorneys, 2 remaining board members, a restructuring consultant, the temporary chief financial officer whose loyalty seemed to change depending on which way the stock price moved. They all went silent when Clara stepped through the revolving doors. Adrian turned. For a second, his face softened. Only for a second. Then he was Adrian Vale again, controlled, unreadable, impossible to intimidate. "You're late," he said. Clara glanced at the lobby clock. "It's 6:58. I expected 6:55. Despite everything, Clara almost smiled. "Then I apologize for my reckless delay." One of the attorneys frowned, unsure whether assistants were allowed to joke during corporate disasters. Adrian's mouth twitched, but he looked away before anyone could notice. "The delegation lands in 40 minutes, he said. "We meet them at the private terminal." The chief financial officer cleared his throat. "Adrian, with respect, bringing Miss Whitmore may not be wise." Clara froze. Adrian turned slowly. "Why?" The man adjusted his glasses. "Given the media attention surrounding her involvement, it may create the wrong impression." "The wrong impression," Adrian repeated. "That this is personal, emotional, unstable." Adrian stepped closer to him. The lobby seemed to shrink. "Miss Whitmore remembered this company's debt schedule when half my executives were hiding behind voicemail. She organized creditor files while my board debated how quickly to abandon me. She knows the North Star proposal better than anyone in this building except me." The CFO's face reddened. Adrian's voice lowered. "So the impression she creates is competence. If that makes you uncomfortable, find another lobby to stand in." No one spoke after that. Clara looked down quickly, not trusting her expression. They left in 3 black cars. The drive to the private terminal felt longer than it was. Rain clouds still hung over the city, but sunlight broke through in thin silver lines, catching on glass buildings and wet pavement. Adrian sat beside Clara in the back seat, reviewing the North Star file. Clara had built that file 2 years ago. The project was enormous: ports, rail corridors, energy facilities, and digital logistics systems across multiple regions. Adrian had chased it for 18 months before the financing collapse made everyone assume Vale International was too unstable to win anything. But Clara knew what most people had forgotten. The proposal was brilliant. Not flashy, not desperate. Brilliant. It solved problems no competitor had even noticed. "Mr. Vale," she said quietly. He did not look up. "Yes. They won't only ask whether you have the money. I know. They'll ask whether they can trust you to finish. I know. They'll mention the bankruptcy. I know. They may mention Vanessa and Marcus." At that, Adrian looked up. Clara held his gaze. "And if they do, you cannot react." His eyes narrowed slightly. Anyone else might have backed down. Clara did not. "They will not be testing whether you feel pain," she said. "They will be testing whether pain controls you." For several seconds, Adrian said nothing. Then he closed the folder. That sounded rehearsed. It was. "You planned to lecture me. I planned to remind you." "Of what?" Clara looked out at the road ahead. "That the people who betrayed you are not the people in that meeting." Adrian studied her profile, then gave a short nod. At the private terminal, the delegation from Singapore arrived in quiet luxury. 5 executives, 2 legal advisors, and Minister Elaine Tan, the government official overseeing the North Star Infrastructure Partnership. She was elegant, calm, and sharp-eyed in a way that told Clara she missed nothing. Introductions were brief. Adrian shook each hand with steady confidence, not arrogance, not pleading. Confidence. Clara watched the delegation watching him. They had expected a ruined man. He gave them a disciplined one. The meeting took place in a private conference room overlooking the runway. No cameras, no reporters, no applause, just contracts, risk assessments, financial models, and the kind of silence powerful people used when they wanted someone to fill it with mistakes. Adrian did not. Minister Tan opened the file in front of her. Mr. Vale, your proposal remains technically impressive, she said, but your company is under severe financial strain. Yes, Adrian said. A few board members shifted uncomfortably, as if honesty were dangerous. Adrian continued, our liquidity position was damaged by the collapse of the European financing package. We have since stabilized the most urgent personal guarantee exposure and renegotiated several creditor timelines. Minister Tan's gaze moved briefly to Clara. Clara kept her expression neutral. And your leadership, Minister Tan asked, your board appears divided. My board is frightened, Adrian said. The room went still. He did not apologize for it. Fear is understandable, he continued, but it is not strategy. North Star does not need a company that has never been hit. It needs one that knows exactly what failure costs and has rebuilt its discipline from the ground up. One of the advisors leaned forward. Your competitors argue that Vale International is too damaged to execute. Adrian opened the file Clara had prepared and slid copies across the table. My competitors submitted bids with 3 weaknesses, he said. They underestimated port congestion by 12%, ignored regional labor timing, and assumed energy routing that will fail under peak season demand. We did not. For the next hour, Adrian took the room apart. Not brutally. Precisely. He answered every question. When he needed a document, Clara already had it. When an advisor challenged a number, she provided the updated page. When Minister Tan asked about contingency logistics, Adrian nodded once, and Clara placed the correct map in front of her before the question finished leaving her mouth. By the end, the delegation was no longer studying a fallen billionaire. They were studying a machine that still worked. Then Minister Tan closed her folder. There is one matter I would like clarified, she said. Adrian waited. Our office received a private message from Marcus Ellery last night. Clara's pulse jumped. Adrian did not move. Minister Tan watched him closely. He advised that your company's internal weaknesses are worse than public filings suggest. He also implied your recent emergency stabilization was not the result of business strength, but of personal financial assistance from an employee. The air changed. Everyone in Adrian's group went rigid. Clara felt every eye in the room turn toward her. Adrian's expression remained calm, but Clara saw the cold anger behind it. Minister Tan asked, "Is that true?" Adrian looked at Clara. For one terrible second, she thought he might deny it to protect the deal. Instead, he said, "Yes." The attorneys looked horrified. The CFO almost choked. Adrian continued, "An employee made a personal sacrifice I neither requested nor deserved. That payment gave this company time, but time is not execution. This proposal, this team, and these numbers are why we can deliver North Star." Minister Tan's eyes did not leave him. "And this employee?" Adrian's voice shifted, almost imperceptibly. "This employee," he said, "understood the value of this company when people with larger offices and smaller courage did not." Clara stared at the table, her throat tight. Minister Tan looked from Adrian to Clara, then back again. "Loyalty is difficult to measure in a risk model," she said, "but it is not irrelevant." The meeting ended 20 minutes later. No decision was given. No promises were made. But when Minister Tan shook Adrian's hand, she held it a moment longer than before. Outside the terminal, the board members erupted into nervous analysis. Adrian said nothing. He walked to the car with Clara beside him. Only when they were alone in the back seat did he speak. "Marcus tried to kill the deal." "Yes," Clara said. "He used you to do it." Clara looked down. "I'm sorry." Adrian turned sharply. "Don't." She looked at him. "Do not apologize for being loyal," he said. "Not to me, not to anyone. The car pulled onto the highway. For the first time in months, Clara saw the city ahead not as a place waiting to laugh at them, but as a place that might one day regret underestimating them. Adrian opened the North Star folder again. His voice was quiet, but something fierce lived underneath it. "If we win this," he said, "everything changes." Clara looked at him. "And if we do?" Adrian's eyes stayed on the road ahead. "Then we make them wish we had." The decision came on a Monday morning. Clara was in the records room, sorting through boxes of old contracts, when she heard the first shout. Not a scream, not fear, a shout of disbelief. She stepped into the hallway and saw employees moving toward the glass-walled conference room at the end of the floor. People who had spent weeks whispering now stood frozen with phones in their hands. Someone dropped a stack of folders. Someone else covered her mouth. Clara's heart began to pound. She walked faster. Inside the conference room, Adrian stood alone at the head of the table, phone in hand, his face unreadable. For one terrible second, Clara thought they had lost. Then Adrian looked up. His eyes found hers through the glass. And Clara knew. The room erupted. North Star signed. $3.8 billion. They chose Vale. The words crashed through the office like thunder. People began cheering, some laughed, some looked stunned, as if they had forgotten what hope sounded like. The few employees who had stayed through the worst weeks hugged each other openly. Phones started ringing. News alerts began appearing almost immediately. Vale International, SECUAS, $3.8 billion, NORTHSTAR contract. ADRAN Vale, MAKES impossible comeback. Disgraced CEO returns with largest infrastructure deal of the year. Clara stood in the doorway, unable to move. $3.8 billion. Not just a contract, a resurrection. The debt would be renegotiated. The creditors would step back. The board would stop sharpening knives. The investors who had run from Adrian would suddenly remember his number. The people who had laughed would pretend they had always believed. Adrian did not smile. That was what Clara noticed first. While the office celebrated around him, he stood very still, as if victory was not something he trusted yet. Then the calls began. First came the board chairman, suddenly warm, suddenly proud, suddenly speaking of our shared resilience. Adrian listened for 20 seconds. Then he said, "You asked for my resignation before the ink was dry on the bankruptcy filing." The chairman's voice became faint through the speaker. Adrian ended the call. Next came investors, then lenders, then reporters, then politicians. By noon, the same lobby that had looked abandoned days earlier was packed with cameras and security guards. Reporters shouted questions every time the elevator doors opened. "Mr. Vale, how did you secure the North Star deal? Is Vale International officially out of danger? Do you have a comment on Marcus Ellery's competing bid? Is it true your assistant saved the company?" Clara stayed away from the windows. She did not want cameras. She did not want attention. She had already been turned into a headline once, and it had felt like strangers walking through her old house with muddy shoes. But attention found her anyway. By afternoon, the internet had rewritten itself. The same people who had mocked her now called her loyal, admirable, rare. Some posted long, dramatic messages about believing in people during hard times, as if they had not laughed when she lost everything. Clara read none of it. She sat at her desk, quietly updating Adrian's schedule. At 3:40 p.m., Vanessa Vale arrived. The office fell silent again, but this silence was different, not fear, curiosity. Vanessa stepped out of the elevator in a pale blue dress and heels sharp enough to sound like warnings against the marble floor. She looked perfect, as always, but there was tension beneath the perfection now. Her eyes moved across the office, lingering on the people watching her. Then she saw Clara. For the first time, Vanessa did not look through her. She looked directly at her. "Is Adrian available?" Vanessa asked. Clara kept her voice professional. "Do you have an appointment?" Vanessa's expression tightened. "I'm his wife." Clara held her gaze. "You filed for divorce." A few people nearby turned away too late to hide that they had heard. Vanessa's smile became thin. "I need to speak with him." Clara glanced at Adrian's closed office door. "He's in meetings." "This is personal." "I'm aware." Vanessa stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Do not forget your place." Clara felt the old version of herself stir. The quiet assistant who would have apologized, moved aside, made herself smaller. But that woman had sold her house, survived public humiliation, and walked beside Adrian into the meeting that brought his company back. So Clara did not move. "My place," she said calmly, "is managing Mr. Vale's schedule, and you are not on it." Vanessa's face flushed. Before she could answer, Adrian's office door opened. He stepped out, dressed in a charcoal suit, his expression colder than Clara had ever seen it. "Vanessa!" The sound of her name from his mouth silenced the room. Vanessa turned quickly, softening her face. "Adrian." He did not invite her in. That alone told everyone enough. "I heard the news," she said. "I wanted to congratulate you." "No," Adrian said. "You wanted to see whether it was true." Her smile faltered. "I was worried about you. You were photographed with Marcus the same day you filed for divorce." "That was complicated." "It looked simple." The office was so quiet Clara could hear the distant hum of the elevators. Vanessa glanced around, clearly humiliated by the audience. "Can we speak privately?" Adrian looked at Clara. "Add 5 minutes to the end of my day." Clara nodded. Vanessa's eyes flashed. "You need her permission now." "No," Adrian said. "I need her judgment." The words landed harder than any insult. Vanessa stared at him. Then, for just a moment, her polished mask slipped, and Clara saw the panic underneath. Vanessa had left a sinking ship. Now the ship had risen from the water, stronger than before, and she was standing on the wrong shore. "I made a mistake," Vanessa whispered. Adrian studied her, without emotion. "Yes," he said, "you did." At that exact moment, Marcus Ellery appeared from the elevator. If Vanessa's arrival had caused silence, Marcus's caused ice. He walked in wearing confidence like armor, but Clara saw the strain in his jaw. Marcus was handsome, wealthy, and practiced at looking relaxed. Yet today, beneath the expensive suit and easy smile, he looked like a man watching a door close. "Adrian," Marcus said, "we should talk." Adrian turned toward him slowly. For months, Marcus had been untouchable, the rich best friend, the smiling traitor, the man who had taken Vanessa and tried to poison the North Star deal behind Adrian's back. Now he stood in Adrian's office, asking for a conversation. Adrian's voice was calm. "No." Marcus laughed once, as if he had misheard. "Come on, we've known each other too long for this." "That is exactly why the answer is no." Marcus's smile faded. "I can help with distribution channels," he said. "North Star is too large for you to handle alone." "You contacted Minister Tan," Adrian said. Marcus went still. "You gave her private information. You used Clara's sacrifice as a weapon. You tried to make loyalty look like instability because you had none of your own." Vanessa looked sharply at Marcus. Apparently, even she had not known that part. Marcus's jaw tightened. "Business is business." "No," Adrian said. "Betrayal is betrayal. You only call it business when you are ashamed to say the real word." For once, Marcus had no smooth reply. Adrian looked at the security guard near the elevator. "Escort Mr. Ellery out." Marcus's face darkened. "You'll regret humiliating me." Adrian stepped closer. "No, Marcus, I regretted trusting you. This is different." Security moved in. Marcus turned furious, but there was nothing left for him to do except leave under the eyes of the people who had once feared him. Vanessa remained behind, pale and silent. Adrian looked at her one last time. "Our attorneys can speak," he said. "You and I are finished." Vanessa opened her mouth, but no words came. Then she turned and walked back to the elevator alone. When the doors closed, no one cheered. They did not need to. The victory was too complete for noise. Later that evening, after the reporters left and the office settled into stunned exhaustion, Clara found Adrian standing by the window. The city glittered below them. "You did it," she said softly. Adrian did not turn. "No," he said, "we survived long enough for me to do it." Clara stood beside him, leaving a careful distance. For a while, neither spoke. Then Adrian said, "Tomorrow morning there will be a press conference." Clara nodded. "I'll prepare your statement. I already know what I'm going to say." Something in his voice made her look at him. Adrian turned from the window. His expression was steady, but his eyes held a storm of something Clara could not name. "Everyone thinks they know why I fought my way back," he said. "They don't." Clara's breath caught. "What are you going to do?" Adrian looked toward the city that had mocked him, abandoned him, and finally bowed again. "The unthinkable," he said. The press conference was scheduled for 10 o'clock the next morning. By 9:30, the main hall of Vail International was packed wall to wall with reporters, cameras, investors, executives, and people who had suddenly remembered they believed in Adrian Vail. Clara stood near the side entrance, holding the final schedule in both hands. She had prepared everything: the media list, the seating chart, the legal statement, the order of speakers, the approved financial summary, and the security instructions in case Marcus tried to appear again. But she had not prepared herself. Every major news outlet in the city was there. Cameras flashed before anyone had even walked onto the stage. Reporters whispered her name when she passed. "There she is. That's the assistant. The one who sold her house." Clara kept her eyes forward. She wore the same black dress she had worn the day before. It was simple, modest, and professional. She had thought about buying something new, then decided against it. She had not sacrificed her home to become decoration for a comeback story. At exactly 10 o'clock, Adrian entered. The room changed instantly. Conversations died, cameras rose, reporters leaned forward as if the air itself had become valuable. Adrian walked to the podium with the controlled confidence of a man who had been buried alive and returned with dirt still on his shoes. He wore a dark suit, white shirt, and no visible expression of triumph. That made him look even more powerful. Behind him sat the remaining board members, now smiling like loyal soldiers. Clara noticed the chairman's hands folded neatly on his lap, his face arranged into pride. Yesterday he had spoken of our shared resilience. 3 weeks ago, he had wanted Adrian gone before lunch. Adrian adjusted the microphone. "Good morning." The cameras flashed. "As you know, Vail International has secured the North Star infrastructure contract, valued at $3.8 billion. This agreement stabilizes our company, protects thousands of jobs, and allows us to continue work that many believed was no longer possible." Applause broke out. Adrian waited for it to fade. "I have been asked many questions since the news became public. How did we win? How did we survive? Who deserves credit?" Clara looked down at her folder. She expected him to thank the employees, the negotiating team, Minister Tan, perhaps even the board despite everything. Adrian continued. The truth is simple. This company survived because one person believed in it when belief was costly. Clara's fingers tightened around the folder. The room became very still. Adrian turned his head. His eyes found hers. Clara Whitmore. Every camera swung toward her. Clara froze. 100 faces turned, 100 lenses pointed, the whispers rose like wind. Adrian left the podium. That was the first shock. CEOs did not leave podiums in the middle of billion-dollar announcements. He crossed the stage, walked down the steps, and stopped in front of Clara. She stared at him, heart pounding. "Mr. Vale," she whispered, "what are you doing?" "What I should have done sooner." He held out his hand. Not commanding. Offering. Clara looked at the room, then back at him. She wanted to disappear. She wanted to run. But Adrian's gaze held steady, not forcing her into the spotlight, only asking her not to be afraid of it. Slowly, Clara placed her hand in his. He led her to the stage. The room exploded with camera flashes. At the podium, Adrian stepped aside. "This woman was mocked for loyalty," he said. "She was called foolish because she gave up the only house her parents left her to help pay a debt that was not hers. People said she did it because she wanted attention. They were wrong. She did it because she saw value where everyone else saw failure." Clara's throat tightened. Adrian reached into his jacket and removed a folded document. "This morning, before coming here, I signed 3 things." The board chairman's smile weakened. Adrian held up the first document. "The first is a repayment order. Every dollar Clara Whitmore sacrificed will be returned to her with interest." A wave of murmurs passed through the hall. He held up the second. "The second is the deed to her family home. I bought it back from the developer who purchased it. It will be restored exactly as it was, and the title will be placed in her name before the end of the week." Clara stopped breathing. Her house. The blue house. The lavender, the porch, the bookshelf her father built. Her hand flew to her mouth. "Adrian," she whispered. But he was not finished. He held up the third document. "And the third is a transfer of equity from my personal holdings. Effective immediately, Clara Whitmore owns 10% of Vale International's founder shares." The room erupted. Reporters shouted over one another. "Mr. Vale, are you serious? Is this approved by the board? Does Miss Whitmore have an executive role?" The board chairman stood halfway from his chair. "Adrian, this was not discussed." Adrian turned to him. "No, it was decided." The chairman went pale. Adrian faced the cameras again. "Clara Whitmore will also become Chief Integrity Officer of Vale International. She will oversee internal ethics, executive accountability, and employee protection during the North Star expansion." Clara stared at him through tears. She could not stop. "This company nearly died because men with power forgot the meaning of trust," Adrian said. "It will not be rebuilt by those same rules." The hall quieted. Adrian looked at Clara. His voice softened, but the microphone caught every word. "You gave me time when the world gave me judgment. You gave me loyalty when everyone else calculated my worth. I cannot repay what that meant, but I can make sure no one ever again calls your sacrifice foolish." Clara could barely speak. "You didn't have to do this." "Yes," Adrian said, "I did." For the first time since the collapse, he smiled. Not the cold smile he gave investors. A real one. Then he turned back to the room. "Now," he said, "if anyone has questions about North Star, Miss Whitmore and I will answer them." And that was the moment the city understood. Adrian Vale had not returned alone. He had come back with the woman everyone had laughed at standing beside him, not as his assistant, not as a secret, not as a footnote in his downfall, but as part of the empire he intended to rebuild. Months later, the blue house on Maple Lane had fresh white shutters, lavender blooming by the steps, and lights glowing warmly in the kitchen window. Clara still worked hard, Adrian still spoke too little, Vale International still had enemies. But something had changed forever. The world had once watched Adrian fall. Then it watched Clara save him. And when he rose again, he made sure the whole world knew one thing. The woman they called foolish had been the wisest of them all.